Welcome back, you guys. This is the Art School Graduate. Today, my guest is a principal designer, educator, founder, and community builder whose journey stretches from Richmond, California to professional basketball overseas to leading major companies like Microsoft while building his passion project, Inneract Project, a nonprofit that he spent many years opening doors for underprivileged youth through design. His story sits at the intersection of creativity, culture, purpose, and impact. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today, Maurice Woods. Mo, how are you doing, man?
I'm good, man. Thank you for that intro, man. I appreciate it, man.
No,
Really
no
do.
worries, no worries. So let's see. The man that has lived several different lives. You've gone from athlete, designer, founder, mentor, leader. When you look back, what thread connects all those visions for you?
That's actually a really good question. I think now that I've had time to sort of process my career because I'm older now, I think the one thing that binds all those things together is clarity of life. I look at, man, like some of the things that I did earlier in my year, some of the things that I'm doing now. And, it's very hard to accomplish a lot of things if you don't
Mhm,
have clarity and purpose.
mhm,
And sometimes you don't always understand that until you get older.
mhm,
And I think, family, is part of that equation. I'm a Christian, so I believe in God, and that grounds really everything that I do. Um, I'm a man of purpose, so I do believe in helping others. And I do believe from all the things that I learned from basketball that,
mhm.
if you work hard and you, play fair, and work within a team concept with other people and be able to get along, that you can accomplish great things.
So I'm going to take it back to our conversation we had about a couple of weeks ago. It was a little introduction for the people listening. We had about like a 30, 45-minute introduction between he and I. And one of the things I remembered you saying is first and foremost is I'm a designer. Why is it important that people understand that before they hear the rest of your story?
I think the reason why it's important for me, and this is more of a personal thing, but I think designer really defines not only who I am, but how I think. And, as designers, we're, you know, constantly, working to try to either improve something or make something better, or leverage our skills to help people understand information, or it could be simply trying to develop something that we think will help people be better people in this world. And, my general concept around design is based on a broader purpose. I do believe that, as you look at what design is and you look at it from more of a macro level,
Mhm,
you see that all things around us are designed. And, that goes beyond just the physical things that we design, but you think
mhm,
about the molecules, the way this earth has been designed, to the
mhm,
way that all the things that, animals and creatures and organisms around the world and around mankind all sort of behave together and create and build and design things, all centralized around design. So when I say
mhm.
design, that's my way of expressing the way that I think and the way that
Mhm.
I, process things around me, around this world.
So let's take it back to the beginning, the essence of it. Before design even had taken up space in your life, what did creativity look like for a Black boy growing up in Richmond during that?
Yeah, man. I mean, creativity for me it was more less about the act of trying to draw or trying to build something,
Mm,
but more about the creative outlet that was given to me through, art, and the creativity of making things and building things and taking things apart. It's that curiosity that really drove me, as a kid growing up, to be thoughtful and intuitive about the things that I'm engaged with. And so it was
mhm,
just a driving force that I never really understood until I got older. But
mhm,
now that I think about it, it was really the only thing that, as a young Black kid in, a Richmond, where, it was this community where there was a lot of things happening around me,
Mhm.
poverty, violence, things that really sort of centralized me as a person because it really got me to be in sort of a simple place in a
Mhm.
complex world. And I think, a lot of kids go through that, and I think my process behind it is that it was my own personal safe space that I could go be by myself, spend quiet time, be
Mhm.
calm and settled, and be able to do something that not only expresses my individuality, but it also allowed me to settle in my
Mhm.
thoughts and just think quietly and do things that I didn't have to be pressured or be put in a situation where I had to do this this thing
Mhm.
or build this thing a certain way. It was just open creative expression to do whatever I wanted to do. And that was a
Mm.
solace for me.
Let's stay here for a bit. So you talk about like your upbringing and that environment and that like almost safe space to be you and figure it out and do these things. So how did that sense of pride and responsibility tie in for you when it came time to start making these more larger decisions of like, okay, I'm choosing basketball. Okay, you know what? I'm choosing design. So how did those play a part in your life?
Well, I think, as a youth, I really didn't I really didn't understand a lot about what life held for me. I was playing basketball and where my life was,
Mhm.
and partially because that's all I've really been, exposed to. All the kids in my community were playing sports um, and we all hung out together. We all did things together. But at the end of the day, that's where everything centralized around. We were playing
Mhm.
football, we were playing baseball, we were playing basketball, we were doing it a lot. And it was also our way of, I think, really all the kids in my community, in my hood, we was all doing that just, I think, as a means for, community and being
Mhm.
together and being connected and staying busy and it in a lot of ways, it kept us out of a lot of trouble, but, along those same lines, it was still, felt like there was some level of purpose in the community aspect of being together, playing sports, friendships. We were all connected. And yeah, as I got older and I got to the University of Washington on a basketball scholarship, and then I got into design, even though I never knew what design was when I took the class, it was really that upbringing that really sort of brought me to this place where, yes, I did want to play in the NBA. That was my ultimate goal when I got a scholarship to play basketball at the University of Washington. But it was also this idea that, there are other things in life that I can do once I've learned, the general aspect of, how can I channel some of the other things that I was doing in my life as
Mhm.
well as sports into sort of a meaningful career for myself.
Mhm.
And so that's what I kind of took, it's like I remember, going to the University of Washington and being in design classes and I was the only black person there. I never took it as a means for being unaccepted because I always
Mhm.
felt accepted at my school, but I did, however, embrace the idea of community by finding other people outside of my local sort of connections, that be
Mhm.
basketball at the University of Washington in design school. And I found a good mentor of mine, Tony Gable, who was a black graphic designer. He and I shared the same values around design, community, the work that we're doing was resonating as sort of this cultural sort of combination of art expression and from University of Washington I was kind of getting this more modern clean Swiss,
Yeah.
and I was kind of like merging all these things together. So um you know I really attribute all of my preparation for that from my upbringing,
Mhm.
because it's like I think that had I maybe not have, um, went through what I went through as a kid or being in the community that I was, I don't know, um, what kind of designer I would be at
Mhm.
this point because I think that I learned a lot about like, you know, um, you know, cultural pride and being a black man. What is it
Mhm.
like to be a black man in the hood growing up and being around all black families? My mom and dad were always together, but all my boys, not all of them, but a lot of my boys didn't have fathers,
Mhm.
and we were all together happy, just,
Mhm.
doing things together. And I think that that really shaped who I was by the time I was ready to go to the field that I went into, which was design.
So I'm gonna take us back to the sports aspect of it because through our conversation prior to that, we both come from sports backgrounds and we both went into design. So I shared with Mo before we spoke how my first love and passion was football. I grew up watching it. I loved it. I played it my whole life. I never even thought of art as an option or design as an option. So, my question to you is this. At what point did you realize, or was there a conversation that happened to you for that light switch to hit to be like, you know what, basketball may not be the end result for me here?
Man, man, I can remember that thing like yesterday, dude. Like, here's the thing, and this is for, all the kids that are coming up and play sports and trying to figure out things. When you get to college, you get a rude awakening because,
Mhm,
as a young, high school basketball player who's had success at the high school
mhm.
level, I thought I was the stuff, man. I was, a top center out of my area. And then I was going, to a Pac-10 school,
Mhm,
D1. And, I quickly learned when I got there that like, man, all the other players that I'm playing with are like top and come from, top scorers
mhm,
or come from competitive basketball climates. And they're all hoopers. All of them was. So it's like, you are one and you gotta try to shine amongst that.
mhm,
And I think in my first year, I was redshirted. And for those of you who don't know what redshirting means, that basically means that they sit you out the first year on your scholarship. They maybe want you to work on more development, or they want you to get stronger, or they may
mhm,
want you to do other things. And they basically saying, we're going to sit you for a year and let you develop and grow. And that basically means that instead of being there for 4 years, you'll be there for 5 years. So I got redshirted my first year because I wasn't strong enough.
mhm.
And I was certainly tall. I was 6'10", but I weighed like 198 pounds, man. So
Yeah.
I was like Wimby before Wimby, you know what I'm saying? And I was just like, oh man, this is kind of crazy. Man, I'm getting redshirted. You know, I think my first year went by, my first year of playing, which was my second year, came, and the competition was fierce. And I was just like, dang, I wasn't playing. And I was just like, all right, man, dang, I don't know if I'm gonna make it to the NBA. But at that point, I'm in my second year.
Mhm,
And, by your third year at University of Washington, you have to declare a major.
mhm,
So I arrived at this point in my second year where I'm like, all right, I got to declare a major. My grades aren't that good because I never really cared about school and I was trying to make the
mhm.
NBA. That's what I thought I was going to
Oh,
do. So
yeah.
I just didn't really care as much. And then I'm hit with this reality of, all right, dang, man, I don't want to go back to the hood with nothing. I
Mhm,
wanted to be able to, uh, take advantage of the opportunity that a lot of kids and a lot of my friends may not have had the chance to get. And I felt like, it's kind of disrespectful to that. Like I got an opportunity, man, and how can I not take advantage of that?
mhm,
So I kind of got my act together and it was really at that moment that I was just like, all right, I ain't gonna make it to the NBA. I'm gonna have to figure out something. And then that's how I ended up searching and trying to find a major. And that's how I found design and
mhm,
got into design. It was really not anything sexy like, well, I knew some people that were in design. I thought it was cool. It was literally like, you got to pick a major. I just flipped through a book. Me and my mother did. And she was like, "You like to draw when you were young. What about this?" And I was like, "All right, I'm just going to take that." It was
Mhm.
literally that, dude. And so I got in there and I was like, "Oh, okay." And, the rest is history.
So, what did playing basketball and then going overseas to play basketball, you had to stretch in major ways, especially culture, language, food. So, what did those years teach you that still you hold true to your own designs or even in your own work ethic?
Yeah, I think for the first part, let's just talk about college because college was, great preparation for life because,
Mhm.
you know, I was not only just going to school, but I was on a basketball scholarship. So I was committed to sports at a major university where 75 to 80% of my time was taken up by basketball. So with that said, I spent a great amount of time trying to work as hard as I could to stay on top of all my studies.
Mhm.
And when I got into design school, there was certainly a lot of work that happened. I mean, just getting into design school was tough. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Like I was, competing against about 300 students for, 20 spots, and I didn't even really know that at first. And then, after the second, I got past the first round and got in a second, I was like, man.
Mhm.
And so just to get into the school was, on top of playing basketball that was a big deal.
Mhm.
And then once I got into the design school, I would be on the road playing basketball, have assignments. My teammate is over, we were rooming together and my teammate is asleep. And I'm up in the middle of the night with the light on, working, putting paper up. And, back then, I'm old. Back then, we were cutting up paper and stuff, man. How old I am. And I was like, studying and, designing things, drawing,
Mhm.
sketching ideas, and doing all that stuff in the dark, dude. It was like real for me because I really loved
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
And I think all of that experience really taught me about just discipline. You
Mm.
know, there's,
Mhm.
you played sports, so you know about
Mhm.
the discipline it
Yep.
takes to play sports, but then to play sports and then also at the same time is another different type of discipline, which is, okay, I'm supposed to do these things to help myself
Mhm.
prepare for, basketball and prepare for these things that might happen. That means lifting weights, getting up early in the
Mhm.
morning. And then there's the discipline of schoolwork and having to study and planning your time and doing all this other stuff
Yeah.
that gets added on top of that, which is an additive of the
Yep.
discipline that I had to have. Right. So that was school. Now, as I got to play pro ball, all these things that I really learned that I think really sort of stem into who I became as a designer was really, sort of manifested in all of these experiences in these foreign places where I had to learn how people live differently.
Yeah.
And that is a very, very interesting perspective because, we live in the United States and we take things for granted, dog. I'm telling you, I'll tell you right now, boy, it's
100%.
crazy. It's like just trying to do simple things out there ain't always simple. You have to you know, um, really sort of condition yourself to be living differently and thinking
Mhm.
differently while you're out there. For me, being out there in some part, my wife was out there with me,
Mhm.
but in the beginning, I was out there by myself and I had to fend for myself. I had to learn, how to speak Spanish,
Mhm.
to a certain degree. And, I was in Greece, had to learn how to communicate, had to learn about how people live, how people get around, how people drive on the streets, how
Yeah.
I had to learn nonverbal communication and read
Mhm.
people's faces and be able to understand when somebody's mad at me or when
Mhm.
somebody's happy, because I don't understand what they're saying. And I think those experiences were interesting. And then also, as a designer, dude, like you're out there and you're in awe of the way that different cultures design
Cultures.
things, so it's everything. Like, I think I was very aware
Yeah.
of all the ways that the signage and the billboards and the way that the magazines and the clothing and all of the different, cars and how all these things were,
Hmm.
somewhat similar, but somewhat different in a different
Yeah.
perspective. And those things shaped me as a designer because
Mm.
I remember when I was my second year in Spain, I designed like this. I wish I don't even know if I still have it anymore. Maybe I have it like some old files, but I designed like a little basketball camp flyer for the
Hmm.
team I was playing for. And it was all in Spanish, and I had to like
Yeah.
use like Spanish themes
Yeah.
and, used sort of motifs from the basketball team that I was on to sort of
Yeah.
incorporate that into the design for that flyer. And those things were fun back in the day, and I think
Yeah.
all of those experiences, talking with people, experiencing culture, food, language, ideologies, all sort of shaped me, I think, to what I became when I actually started designing.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the being the athlete and a student. That student athlete gets overlooked a lot,
Yep.
especially if you're in the design field, because we can't just sit and write papers. We have to physically create and build and put stuff together. And I think it sometimes gets overlooked, but the NCAA had it right. The majority of you will go D1 in something else. And Mo, you
Yeah.
went D1 in something else, man. You
Yep.
took that and you chased that dream of being a designer. But there's one thing I know we talked about was the reactions we mostly get. Like, here I am, a football player taking all these art and design classes. I'm looking around, I'm the biggest thing next to the door. You're the tallest, you're ducking your head coming through hallways, and they're looking at you like, oh, business is 340. This is the other building. So they're trying to
Right.
make sure we're in the right place. So, what have those reactions taught you about how narrow people's ideas are about about who can be in these creative spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I think that question sort of summarizes my career. I'll give you a story. Years ago when I played on a team in Spain, I it's very interesting because I'm unmistakably tall. So that's like the first thing and it's funny, I was just talking with a friend of mine not too long ago about this, where,
Hmm.
as, a person who's 6'10" and then black and bald, I mean, everybody goes to the same stereotype all the time. Who you play for, what NBA team you play for, and all of that. So there's always this association with that, which, at this point, I've accepted it as fine. I think the more sort of troubling sort of perspective around it is just in the understanding that, not every black person is the same and being grouped into a certain stereotype that may either deflect from
Hmm.
my true personality and my talent or, sort of, develop some sort of stereotype about who I am as a person and how
Hmm.
I think. And I think, when I was experiencing life overseas, playing ball and all that stuff. The surprising thing about all of that, especially with basketball and with sports, and I'm sure you have gone through this being someone who's played as well, is, it's sports to me, it's goes less, I would say it doesn't always happen this way. So I got to be careful about what I say because not everybody experiences the same
Hmm.
thing. But I have found, I will say that, is that sports has never really been about race for me,
Hmm.
right? It's about, can you ball or can you not ball?
Yep.
And that's it.
That's it.
If you can ball, it don't really matter. It's
Hmm.
like, if you can ball, come on my team. That's kind of thing, right?
Right.
When you deal with corporate and you start to get into that corporate world, well,
Hmm.
it's slightly different sometimes. You have to behave and walk and talk a little differently.
Hmm.
Double consciousness, which is, I don't know if you're aware of
Hmm.
W.D. Du Bois talked about
Yep.
this, is very true. Like, you go in offices and you want to obviously be seen as, everyone else. But it's very hard for you to obviously hide your skin color and who you are.
Mhm.
And then you also come with, how you were raised and the things that you aspire to be or the things that ideologically have become accustomed to because of the way you grew up. And
Mhm.
the customs that you have grown up, whether that be
Yeah.
your parents or the friends and who you hang with. So when those things start to come into play, it's a little bit different. And I think
Mhm.
that it's always been my mission in life is to help people that I mentee understand
Mhm.
that particular aspect of life, right? Which is it's like, yes, we want you to be who you want to be, but you also have to understand that we live in a world that doesn't see you the way you see yourself all the time. And you
Mhm.
just got to be aware of that. And it's not a thing that should inhibit you from
Mhm.
doing anything that you want to do, but you also got to know the game. You
Right.
got to know what your game you're playing in, and whose game it really is.
Mhm.
And once you understand that, you can do pretty good in this business.
Mhm.
And I think I've always attributed, all my experiences playing basketball, growing up in the hood and having the friends. I've always grounded myself on my boys, you
Mhm.
know, from day one. And it's
Good.
always been, that's who I am. That's who I'm most comfortable around. And I'm not apologizing for any of that
Mhm.
stuff, but I know that, when it comes down to, designing, you're not just living in a bubble. You have to design for everyone.
Right.
And what does that mean? So that means like I got to be sensitive to, everybody who I'm designing for. It doesn't
Yep.
matter the color, creed, or anything, religion, all that. So I'm very mindful of that, but I'm also mindful of the fact that marginalized people get left out. So it's helped me as a designer to be able to evaluate solutions to problems that I'm designing for with the lens of, okay, but what about that person? Okay,
Yep.
but what about this person? How does this person feel about that too? Let's not forget this person's going to be using it,
Mhm.
and I think those are, ideals that I've brought with me
Mhm.
that I want every black person or every person of color to be able to contribute to this business. Design needs that. And we're constantly developing and designing things for companies that are designing the things of this world. And the reality of it is that 75, 80% of that is by the hands of white. It's just what
Mhm.
it is.
Yeah.
And so if we don't have our perspective in there, somebody's going to have that perspective for us.
Right.
And so that's what I think my mission in life is to try to help communities really understand that.
Yeah, and that's part of the conversation we had too, being able to code switch. We talked about that, being able to understand when we're playing football or when we're playing basketball or when we're in our sports arena, we have to have a certain mindset. And then when it comes to design, we have to be able to turn off that and focus on, okay, who, what, where, when, why. Because we're,
That's
we're
right.
we're problem solvers, and I 100% agree with you on that that double consciousness is a superpower if you can harness it correctly.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about when things start to fall away. This is just another part of our conversation we talked about with,
Yeah.
hey, football's over, ball slowly is starting to slow down for you and come to an end. What does it take emotionally to let that new version of yourself emerge? Because, like with both of us, we've had this conversation prior. Sports drove our life. That was it. And now that we come to the point where it's like, okay, this isn't it anymore. This isn't the priority. What emotionally did that do to you?
Man, funny story, man. Maybe it's not so funny. It wasn't funny then, but I will tell you, man, when I was done playing basketball, I was done. I was so tired of basketball. I literally didn't watch basketball or play basketball for probably 2 or 3 years. I was done.
Yep.
And part of it is, I worked really hard, and gave everything to basketball,
Yeah.
everything I could, man. And, it's the work tirelessly. And I think, towards the end of my career, I saw it coming. I knew it was there, and, it was the business that really drove me out. It's the people. And I mean, it's no different than, working on a job, right? You work with
Mhm.
people you don't like and you got to deal with it. Basketball for me was draining for me because the things that I loved about the game the most had changed.
Mhm. Yeah.
I enjoyed being able to be out on the court and just play. And, when you play professionally, there's pressure,
Yep.
you're trying to win and, you're getting paid to play and then your agent is in your ear, the team coaches and sponsors are in your ear trying to tell you this and that. And then you got, the media is all over you. I was
Yeah.
overseas, boy, the media is no joke.
Yeah.
They just say anything about you and then people are mad at you. I mean,
Yeah.
it's brutal.
Rough.
And so emotionally, I was ready. I was done.
Mm.
And I think, it made my transition better because, for me, my mind was already in design before I retired. I was already
Mm.
there, to be honest.
Right.
Like my last couple of years, I was playing in Japan and I had my laptop out there. I was designing stuff out there,
Wow.
it's Valentine's Day cards for my girlfriend, my wife
Mm.
then became my wife, designing like little posters, working on animation, because I had time after practice in a
Yeah.
foreign place. It's not like I'm in, a city where, I can just go out and, everybody speaks English and I can get along and get to places I want to go and know where to go and how to. I was at home.
Mhm.
So I took all that time to really work on my craft. And by the time I was done emotionally.
Yeah.
And I think, after about 2 to 3 years, that's when it really hit me because I was just like,
Oh,
"Oh,
wow.
damn, I'm done with basketball."
Yeah.
And that's
Oh,
honestly,
man.
I'm serious,
Yeah.
just like that was my time. It took me about 2, 3 years, and I was just like, "Oh, man, I really
Mhm.
miss the sport, dude, I really miss it." And, I was designing and kinda going through that period, and I had a rough start, getting into design, had a
Mhm.
rough start, and I was just like, "Man, maybe I do wanna maybe I retired too early." I kinda had that withdrawal, of like, man, maybe I should have played another couple of years and did
Oh.
this and did that. And I think that's what it was like for me. So it was kind of a
Mhm.
roller coaster.
Yeah.
It's like this emotional high of like, all right, man, I'm kind of ready for the new chapter of my life. This basketball stuff is kind of like, I'm just over it.
You're right.
And then I had like this mood swing about a couple of years after that where I was just like, dang, withdrawals, like, man, I kind of miss playing and I like
Mhm.
the aspect of competition and being on the floor and the physicality of the
Yeah.
game and trying to outduel my competitors. And,
Right.
that's what it was like for me.
I was there. I'm not even gonna sit there in front. Like when I turned in my pads helmet for that last time, I didn't even watch football. And here it is, a kid that played flag through Pee Wee, Pop Warner, high school, JC, college. Like, you
Right.
know what I mean? It's just like that was my whole life. And I think I was at the point where I was just like physically exhausted, where it was like my body was just like broken.
Yeah.
Like I never had that time to properly heal. And now
Um,
I'm just like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to go anywhere. And it wasn't until it was like, I think mine was a little bit longer because I kind of just went head first into art just to consume
yeah.
me because I was kind of, idle hands get, you can get into trouble. So I just dove head first into art. And then that's when it was like, I think mine was about 5 years out. And I was like,
Mm,
wow, man, I haven't even watched football season will come around. Every Sunday I'm going somewhere else. I'm not watching football.
yeah.
Like
I
I was
feel you,
just
man.
so
Mhm.
disassociated from it, and I just felt like I had to get rid of that feeling just so I can appreciate it now. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yep. I
I'm
know. I
there with you.
100% know what you mean.
Yeah.
I think also, man, it's like, it's the physical, but it's also the mental exhaustion because I think, people don't realize how, sports
Mental gymnastics.
it's more mental than it is physical.
Oh, yeah.
People don't realize that.
They don't.
Eating dog, they see the physical part of it,
Mhm.
but man, the joint is mental because you have to have a mental edge to play the sport.
Right.
And you have to be constantly in kill mode.
Right.
And that is a mental like perspective that you have to keep locked in and tight for
Yeah.
many, 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 many years. And it goes beyond the season. You're in the season. Really, like when I played overseas, when I was playing pro over there, and even in college, you have a summer. But during the summer, you're like working out and you're like, working on your game and all of this other
Right.
stuff. So you really don't have a lot of time. And
Nope.
you're because you want to be better. You want to be
Right.
better the next year. So it's like you gonna put that work in or not.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you put the work in. So it's just like the physical thing, a mental thing of just like being locked in all the time. And then when it's over, I think the first thing I felt, man, was just like a little relief. I was just like, damn, I don't have to get up and go to the gym and work out. I don't have to
5
lift
a.m.
weights.
workouts.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit it was that, and then the other part of the mental part was like, "Man, I don't gotta deal with agents. I don't gotta deal with team. I don't gotta deal with the media anymore. I can be left alone,
Mhm.
and I can relax." And that was the other part of it mentally that really kind of, like, tore me up quite a bit,
Mm.
especially towards the latter part of my career.
Okay, so let's transition from sports. Now let's push you right into this career of design. Your career stretches from agency work to startup life, from Yahoo to Microsoft. What has guided your career across so many different environments and platforms?
Yeah, I think, this is a good question, and I hope that you have a bunch of young listeners out there that will
Mhm.
hear this, because this is, to me, the most important aspect of a career, especially in design is, and I learned this through sports, is, with design, you have to be vigilant about understanding every aspect of not only the business, but the the work ethic that it takes to be an exceptional designer. You
Yep.
can't settle for anything less than exceptional. And, you know, with sports, it's a little different because
Mhm.
you can be that guy on the bench that scores, you know, 5 to 10 points a game. When you're in design, and especially a person of color, to get that job, you gotta be exceptional, in my opinion. Like, you can't settle for anything less than that because
Right.
it's a lot of competition and you're working against a lot. We generally don't go to the top tier schools.
Mhm.
Some of us are grinding and doing studies at boot camps.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to go through University of Washington, which is a great program, by the way. Um, and I was lucky because I got a scholarship there, and they
Mhm.
actually happened to have a really, really good design program. And my work ethic, dog, was nuts. Like I was studying design all the time. I was designing for everyone all the time. Like, give me a free project. I was doing it. I just like, you can need a logo. I'll do it. I'll do it for free. And I was just doing
Yeah.
everything. If you ask me to put together a resume, I'm designing that. If
Mhm.
you ask me to put together a basic document, with some information, I'm designing that. I was always engrossed in magazines, and I was kinda nuts a little bit, and now that I think about it, I was a little excessive, but, that drove me in my career. That
Mhm.
set me up to be successful, and that's how I got to the places that I got to. I was designing for Nike. When I was done with, playing basketball, I'll tell you this story. I came home from playing basketball, and I was settled in Seattle because I
Mhm.
went to school there, and me and my wife were there. And then we moved back down to the Bay Area after I was done playing. And, if you remember, this was, I think, maybe 2000, 2001. It was a big dot-com bust at that
Yeah.
time. And so all the businesses, graphic design businesses in San Francisco and the Bay Area were all impacted by that. So nobody was hiring. So I'm going into that job market at that time, being done with basketball. Hadn't really worked at a design firm any place for about 7 seasons, 7 years, 8 years. And so I'm bringing my portfolio around, and I'm just like, it was crazy. Like literally, I think I I put together this like little CD. That
Mhm.
also tells you how old I am.
Portfolios
CD.
on CD.
Man, you remember that, man? And I'm, like, driving all over San Francisco, and, I was dropping off my CD. I was just walking into design firm, and that's kinda
Yeah.
crazy because it's like, who walks into the design firm?
Right.
And I just literally, like, walked in the design firm, gave the reception my CD, my portfolio, and
Mhm.
walked out the door. And I was doing that. I literally, like, had a sheet, and I was just going to each one of them and just handing it off, and never heard from anybody. I heard from one person, and, he called me back, and he was like, "Man, your portfolio is pretty good." And that one person, my boy Guthrie Dolan, you know, that callback was the beginning of, what really sort of set me off in this
Mhm.
field, because once he had did that, that had given me a little bit of confidence, because he was just like, "Yeah, you're a good designer, blah, blah, blah." And then he hooked me up with a little project here and there. He wasn't ready to hire at that time. He's like, "Well, I know this person, boom." And then I just started feeding off of that energy, dude. I was
Mhm.
feeding off of that. And that's what I think my starting career was like. It was just feeding off the energy, going to different AIGA events. I was talking to people that were presenting designers
Mhm.
that own design firms. I was going to their talks. After that, I'm asking them questions like, here's my thing. I was in hustle mode, real talk. I was in hustle mode, and
Right.
I was all over doing that. And I think that over the course of time, um, I handed my portfolio off to enough people where I got one person who was like, "All right, I'll bring you in for a freelance," Neil Zimmerman.
Mhm.
And, he was like, "I'll bring you in." That's that's how I got my first, like, kind of like a design firm after basketball,
Oh, dope.
position,
Yeah.
and I was freelancing for him for a bit, and then, before I went back to graduate school. Yeah, yeah, it's just a crazy thing to think about. I I tell people this not to scare them, but kind of to scare them a little bit, because I want, my people to be prepared. And what I'm trying to hopefully communicate to everyone is that, you got to get off your, what, to get
Yeah.
what you want. And if you don't do that, and you're not willing to do that, then it's just going to be tougher. It's
Mhm.
not impossible, but it's tougher unless you come from a top school and you have a situation where you have the connections through that top school to get
Yeah.
through that. And I had some at UW, but I know and meet a lot of mentees of mine that don't have that. And they're trying to get through, and they're like, "Man, ain't no blacks, and I can't, I'm trying to get connected. Nobody's calling me back," all these things, and they all exist. And if you
Mhm.
don't have the drive and the hunger and the commitment to just keep going, knocking on doors, it's just tough.
Yeah. It can really deter you. It can really make you
Yep,
sit back and question. I had that. I had that. We had that conversation. I was like, man, if I had something like this coming up about your interact, and we're gonna touch on that, I was
yep.
like, man, I probably wouldn't have wandered far from graphics because it's just hard if you don't have those connects, if people don't view your portfolio. So it's just you can have the greatest portfolio, but as much as we like to say your work will speak for itself, I would say about 90% of that is who you know too.
It is. It is about who you know. It's all yeah, I would say majority of it is about who you know. I can't name names, but I can tell you, man, I've talked to many VPs, many design
Mhm.
directors and recruiters, and I'm telling you, man, like, there's so many jobs out there that they don't even you may never even see. You may
Right.
never even see it. And there are so many opportunities where if you know people, you just at least get in the front door and you get your resume handed off to somebody who can take a look. And that's half
Right.
the battle nowadays.
Right. It
I just
is.
get myself looked at. Can I at least get it looked at?
Right.
Ain't that crazy? Like, can I just get it looked at?
Right.
And, I think that's the part that's discouraging to me, because I see a lot of um folks. I was just talking to a mentor the other day. He was just telling me, he was like, people he knows dropping out. They not dealing with
Man.
it because the economy is bad already. Then he gotta, they gotta make money, and they trying to get into this. They can't get no callbacks. They can't get no jobs. So they're quitting. They're quitting. And, you know, I can't knock that for that. It's like you gotta
No.
live.
Yeah.
and you can't get a job and you trying, you hear no's, no, no's, and you
Man.
can't get in, then you got family, you got life, and you got to do what you got to do. So,
Right. So much untapped potential that just gets wasted. And that's
yep,
the part that sucks. Yeah.
yep.
So let's talk about this partner, not this partnership, this practice that you've built, and it's called Inneract Project.
Yep.
What was the origin, I would say, pain point or gap that you're trying to solve when you started it?
So, Interact Project, the main sort of call to action for me stems from my own upbringing and my own experience as a young person going through the process of discovering design. So I've already told you, like, as a kid, I used to like draw. I also, play basketball, and that's how I sort of had to pick a major. And that's how I kind of found design that way.
Right.
For me, the objective of Interact Project was, I know there's other kids out there like me that have talent and
Mhm.
and have the talent, but don't even know that design exists. And they may not have the ability to be able to be, I mean, obviously 6'10" or play and get a scholarship to go to a school and discover,
Mhm.
design. So I was like, as someone who's gone through that, I want to be able to provide that for my people. And then the second part of it is that, as a young Black man at the time, coming up through the ranks, coming up through school, trying to, be successful
Yep.
myself. I mean, I'm reading books and none of them books got Black people in it, hardly at all. I'm sitting there like, it's kind of one of those things like you just sitting there, ever sit in an environment and you're just like, dang, man, this is kind of crazy to do. Is everybody seeing what I'm seeing around here? Everybody
Mhm.
acting like this ain't what it is, and it is. And I'm sitting there looking around like, man, there
Oh,
ain't no
yeah.
Black people around here. What is going on? And then
Mhm.
I'm looking in magazines and all these things, and there ain't no Black people. And I'm just like, all right, well, I know there are some Black designers out there, but then I was just like, okay, how can I do my part in
Mhm.
helping them? And I think it was Interact Project from the very beginning was never about, I got to solve the world's problems of trying to, get every Black person or every person of color in design. It really just started with me trying to do something to provide kids of color in communities of color that
Mhm.
didn't know about design, and then also contribute something to the industry that I thought would more or less definitely benefit from having diverse perspectives in the world, especially because design is the connector of all the things that we interact with, we are exposed to every
Mhm.
single day, every single minute. And yet, you know, a lot of those are not designed by people that look like us.
So you started this project with 3 kids, and by the end of the first summer, you had 30.
Yeah.
What hit that made this grow to be this, like, huge, bigger than just something that was on a piece of paper?
I think the thing that hit for me was, like you said, I started off with 3 students, because keep in mind that, when I first started Interact Project and I was trying to, I was when I first started Interact Project with just me, I wrote a proposal, I did it in my University of Washington graduate
Mhm.
class, and then I was like, I just drove to various different community centers, and I was asking them, "Can I have my class there?" And, I heard a lot of no's, man.
Mm.
I was getting turned down left and right, and
Yeah.
I was just kinda like, "Dang, this kinda crazy, man. I'm doing this for Black kids community, I'm doing it for free, and I can't get a community center to let me have, like, 2 hours. Just can I just get 2 hours?" And so at that time, I was also part-time coaching, assistant coaching basketball. And I was at a community center in Seattle coaching. And one of the ladies there that was running that particular community center was going to West Seattle, at this place called Dale Ridge Community Center. And I was talking to her about it. She was like, you can come to Dale Ridge and do it. And that's how it all really kind of happened. It was like,
Oh, wow.
all right, I'm going there. And I just literally put posters up. I said, I'm having a free class. My first students that I had that actually showed up was about 3 students, 2 African American, 1 Asian. And it was just 3 of us in a classroom. And that was the
Mhm.
beginning of, I think, I can't remember. It was like June 2004, maybe. And then by the end of the summer, I had connected with a good friend of mine, Zithri, and he worked at another community organization called TAF, Technology Access Foundation, that was
Mhm.
run by a good friend of mine also named Trish. And, we started collaborating, we started talking. And before you know, I was working with his students. So I had like 3 kids, and then I'm now like 30 kids.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, this is crazy. And then the work that they were producing was phenomenal, dude. Like
Yeah.
the inner was there. We were creating, we were being creative. The kids were doing really interesting work. And, you know, I think that set the model off because after that, the following years, University of Washington got involved and my design department there were like, all right, you can start having the classes here. So I started having at UW. And then I
Mhm.
was inviting all the students in there, which was an interesting model because now all the students from all these communities in
Mhm.
Seattle, Black kids were coming to a college campus and seeing college design work on the
Yep.
wall. And that's when, like the combination of actually doing the work, but then actually being surrounded in a college
Mhm.
that is actually doing design work, that's a pretty powerful thing that we're able to do.
So what did that resilience reveal to you about the students and about yourself? Because I feel like having all those no's, you almost are sitting there, and I hate to say it, but questioning God, like, you gave me this. Why is this
Yep.
not happening? So what did
Yeah.
that resilience reveal to you within yourself and the students you started with?
Well, I think what it really taught me, to be honest, and to be honest, like I still reflect on this a little bit today because it was a lot of work and it was a lot of heartache, long
Mhm.
nights, sacrifices that I had to make to actually be where I am today, and I had doubted a lot of the work and the things that I was doing, and the resiliency around it was really simply finding energy from the students and the parents. It was finding as much, I would say, as much as I possibly could around the people that supported the cause that drove me to continue on. Cause I'm gonna tell you something, man. There's a number
I
of
know
times
it.
I was gonna be done with IP. Real talk. I was done. I was like,
Oh,
no,
I
I can't
believe it.
do this. I can't this no, man, I can't do this. It's too much.
Yeah.
And, I've had disappointing times and, you know, I was talking to my boy Chris Heimbuck, the other day. He's one of the guys who's dear to my heart as well when it comes to
Mhm.
Interact Project, especially because he and I have gone through a lot. He's helped me a lot with a lot of the work that I'm doing too along this journey. And we were reflecting about, an event. And you
Mhm.
talk about resiliency, starting Interact Project and the students and how all that energy flows into is one thing. But once you get into a point where you're actually raising money and you're
Mhm.
trying to build an organization and stay running this business and then keep your programs going and
Yeah.
then have a family,
Mhm.
and all these other things going on.
Yep.
Whew. And I
Yeah.
remember we had an event in San Francisco, and I was probably down to like, man, dog, I want to say down to like I ain't paying for stuff on my credit card. That's how it was. Me and my boy Chris, we held an event at SF Jazz in San Francisco,
Mhm.
and from that totally flipped our whole financial situation in literally a year.
Oh,
And then I was
wow.
also very fortunate because you know, my boy Luke Woods, he was at Facebook
Mm.
at that time and he was doing well as a designer there. He eventually became the head of design. Well, he was also, you know, a alumni of UW and he was actually after I started Interact Project, my second year of doing it, he was one of my TAs because he was
Hmm.
coming through after I had just left. So he already had the context of working in
Yeah.
that. And now he had moved down to the Bay Area, was working at
Amazing.
Facebook. And
Wow.
then that's how he and I sort of came together. And, the rest is history, dude.
Mhm.
So resiliency is, I have a whole respect for how God works in your life because
Mhm.
you never really know who he's going to bring in your life and put in your
Right.
life to do certain things. And it's very hard to doubt. I mean, it's very easy to doubt
Yeah.
because we can't predict the future, and we tend to, adhere to our own human understanding, which is
Yeah.
like, this thing ain't supposed to work because sometimes it ain't supposed to work, dude. It ain't supposed to work. And then, you look at it and you're like, man, from what I know, this thing ain't going. And then it
Yeah.
happened. And then that
Yeah.
teaches you something. That's what resiliency is, dude. And if
Mhm.
you don't have that level of patience and understanding around that, it's very hard to be successful in any
Yeah.
business, you
Yeah.
know?
But can I share with you one thing I really appreciate? Because after our last talk, I actually went through your whole website and looked at everything. Can I tell you, I love the multiple entry points that these kids can get involved in. Like, I feel like for us, because we were able to go to college, we had that singular entry point into design, right? What you're doing, you have middle school, like to career. Like, you don't like, I think that is just brilliant. And I just want to know,
Thank you.
why was it important that you built it that way?
It was important to build it that way because, and now see this, now this is where it gets deep
Mhm.
because it was important to build it that way because I knew from the ground one that people of color face barriers, dude. And you can't just kids learn just as much in the classroom as they learn outside of the classroom, and probably more outside the classroom if we want to be real. Our whole lives is centered around the things that we experience as people.
Yeah.
And so it was very important to me that Interact Project wasn't just a teaching institution or
Mhm.
program, that it was understanding that, okay, teaching is the given part. Like we can
Right.
teach, and
Right.
that's the default.
Mhm.
You can teach. The big piece of the organization was, well, if a kid can't eat,
They
or
not gonna wanna
they
do
don't
it.
have money to buy, X, Y, and Z, or they don't have internet, they
Yeah.
can't even get access to the stuff that we trying to do.
Right.
We gotta look at the barriers. We gotta look, it's gotta be layered, right? And then it's gotta be like, okay, as a system, because that's what we did. We built a system. This
Mhm.
wasn't just about teaching. This was about developing a system that's multi-layered, that understands that education is the core,
Mhm.
but all these other things exist out that affect how people learn. And we need
Mm.
to understand what that is. We need
Mhm.
to know that, like, okay, when our students come to our classes are free. They don't got to worry about
Yeah. Yeah.
when they come to our class. Parents know when they come to our class. Parents know their kids are going to get fed. They're going to get fed, pretty good food.
Mhm.
Sandwiches, drinks, and stuff. They don't got to pay for any of that stuff. They know if they need a computer, we'll get you a computer. They know if you need software, we'll find the software to give to
Yep.
you. And then we also will be like, all right, well, because we want you to be valued, we want to make sure that you're getting stipends and you're getting paid so that
Hmm.
the work that you're doing means something. It means something of value. And those are not conscious, those are subconscious values that we're injecting into our students. We want them to understand that my work is worth something.
Yeah.
All of these things are just ground zero for us. And then as we think about it, from middle school all the way up to college, I'm thinking like, okay, well, we have the middle school and high school is all about education. So
Yeah.
we're like thinking, we're doing studio tours, we're doing workshops. And then once you kind of get to the college and early career, you're in the point now where, you've either gone to college or you're looking to get into your career where you of choice. And those support areas are where we're focused on now. Like we
Mhm.
do some youth program stuff, but when, everything start cracking down with, diversity initiatives being shut down, we had to evolve.
Pivot.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so we kind of went like, all right, well, I was like, how can we be most effective with the amount of money that we have and amount of time that we have as an organization? And how can we affect the most change? And so that's when I was like, okay, we got to go to this college early career because that's the bottleneck that's been happening right now. It's like they
Yeah.
can't get jobs. The industry has shifted, and, you know, they're expecting, entry level to have 3 years experience, which is crazy to me. How you gonna get an entry level position and expect you to have 3 years? I mean, that's the whole point of an entry level
It's
position,
zero. They
you
teaching
know?
you. You need to start
Really?
at zero.
Ain't that crazy, man? And I'm sitting there like, really? Really, we doing it? So that's the reason why I created Uplift. And, I can't even take claim to that because Uplift was started by, 3 volunteers that I had.
Mm,
That's another thing I need to note is that, you know, the structure that I built, we have all these things around the students around education, but the structure around learning and
mm,
teaching was crowdsourced kind of like I had, teachers, and then those teachers would teach, and then we'd have TAs that would volunteer, and then those
mhm.
teachers would move on, and then the TAs became the teachers. And then they would have TAs, and then they would become the teachers, and then they would have TAs, and we're just moving like that. And we
That's
had
beautiful.
committees. I had big committees,
That's
and
beautiful.
they were developing and creating ideas. And Uplift was kind of born out of interview prep, which was an initiative that my education advocacy team built, which
Mm,
was during the pandemic when people were losing their jobs. They were like, okay, we're just going to have like this sheet online. It was very sort of rudimentary. It was just like,
yeah.
we're just gonna put this, Google Doc sheet online, and we have, names. You can put your name if you want a mentor, and
Hmm.
then people would just sign up to
That's
meet with these
cool.
people, and that's what it was, dog, and it was
Yeah.
successful. So we went back, and then we were like, all right, how can we actually do this for real? And
Hmm.
that's how Uplift really started was really through that. And, over the last couple of years, I've kind of taken it over and have sort of really built out the sort of the meat and potatoes of this program to where it is now. But it was
Hmm.
all started by, that crew of, early volunteers that actually
Man.
developed it and came up with the idea.
Man, that's amazing. I just love the all entry points of access because I've talked with you before. Growing up in the inner city, it's not a lot of entries of access. There's not a lot of
Uh,
points of access. There's kind of that what's the word I'm looking for? Not nepotism, but it's very slim. The door to get in is very slim and it's very
yeah.
hidden. You have to know it or you have to see it or you have to have that passion to go after it and seek it out. But I love that you're just going to these places like, hey, do you like art? You want to design? Come on. You like
Yeah.
art? You want to design? Come on. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned, even being an instructor, is like if you want kids or students to come to anything, food.
Yeah.
90% of the battle is if they have something to eat. If you provide something to eat, they're going to listen.
Yeah. And
That's it.
and and what's fun about that is it's like, it took me years to learn that.
Mm.
'Cause, I think when I first started off, I was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna have free classes that people will come," and it's like, "Nah, they ain't coming." And as soon as I started doing food, and then we started doing the stipends, kids show up, families show up, and
Oh,
it's
yeah.
kinda crazy, the reality. At first, I was just kinda like, "Man, dang, why blah, blah, blah?" And then I actually started to think about it, and I was like, "Man, that makes sense," because, families are stacked. They got a lot of stuff that they're worrying about and dealing with.
Life.
It's life
Yeah.
happens. And so it's not necessarily a knock towards the organization. It's just where people are. And you got to meet
Hmm.
people where they are. And that's
Yeah.
that's what we did.
Yeah. All right, Mo. So this is my quick fire round. You just give me one word answers. You can describe it. You can leave it as is. But I like to see where people's heads are during this moment before we bring things to an end. So Richmond in one word.
I would say diverse
It's okay. One quality every great designer needs.
typography,
One thing young creatives and designers need to stop doubting.
personality,
Now, this one might put you in a bit of a bind here, but education, advocacy, or entrepreneurship.
entrepreneurship.
Okay. So let's see.
We
Mo,
can
we
unpack that too.
okay, touch on it. Touch on it. I threw that
Uh,
purposely in there because I looked at your history and I was like,
mhm.
this man is an entrepreneur. He has been an athlete, so he has the education. He has all these levels of, and now you're preaching advocacy because you're like, I came from this community. I didn't
Yes.
have this. I want to make sure people that's coming behind me see it. So that's why I chose that just to see where your scope was. But break it down for us. What made you choose that one?
Because what I learned very quickly is if you don't have money, it's hard to make change. It just is.
Mhm.
And yes, you can do some things, but when you have familiarity with what it takes to run and move mountains, you got to try to have funding and you got to have revenue to be able to do that. Because at some point, if you don't have that revenue to do that, it becomes very hard to accomplish certain
Yeah.
things in your organization and really sort of drive change because you need to be able to use money sometimes to be
Hmm.
able to afford the things that students and programs need to thrive and actually help people and drive community change.
That's the truth. I wish it
And,
was easy
it's
that
like,
everybody can get behind it, but money makes the
yeah,
world go round.
I mean, it's if you ask me so if you ask a question like around like, what did I start with? Yeah, it was education. That's what I
Mhm.
started with. You know, I learned after a while, like, oh dang, I actually got to raise money if I want to do this thing. And that's when I was just kind of like, dang, I don't know how to do any of that stuff. And it took me years to learn how to do that. That's is what has allowed me to stay in business
Mhm.
after over 20 years, dog, of doing
Yeah.
this. So,
Yeah. So these last few little moments, they're kind of questions of reflection. It's just, I'm curious about how do you build a self that stays grounded when the world keeps projecting assumptions onto you? Because remember, we talked about that earlier, your height, your skin tone, how people perceived you. And it's like you're moving through many rooms that you may be the only one, like you said earlier. So, how do you build and ground yourself when others keep projecting what you should be or where you should be or where you should be going?
well, I think all in all, I ground myself really around my beliefs. Like I said, I'm a man of faith. And at the end of the day, everything that comes to a head, it always comes down to that. Like
Yeah.
I'm secure in who I am. And, I know that if I ever waver,
Hmm.
and how I feel about things that I'm doing or not doing, I can always pray about it. And for me, I tend to feel better about where I am. I think the grounding of my spirit, having my family there, my wife and my son, my mom and my dad, brothers, sisters and their families, my boys, they all help me stay grounded because they know me, and they know the
Yeah.
things that I struggle with and they know the things that, I'm really good at. And they're
Hmm.
able to give me perspective. I always tease my wife because, she's my hardest critic on my work, boy. I'm like trying to show her work, boy. She be killing my stuff. I'll be like, dang, man. But, I love that about her because, she's raw with it and she'll give
Hmm.
me the truth. She won't sugarcoat stuff. And that's what I need, man.
Hmm.
And those things ground me. Those things help me be able to walk in my own truth and be able to go with life
Hmm.
in this industry and be as successful as I can be.
Yes. So, as you spent this time creating access for young Black and Brown creatives, what part of your younger self are you still trying to protect every time you do this work?
Yeah, I think the one that I may be trying to protect and always will is my sort of sense of um experimentation. And, when I was a kid, you're drawing and you're just creating
Yeah.
and taking things apart, putting things back together again. And I still feel a sense of that over all these years. I still have that. And I think it can kind of be seen in the work that I'm doing with Uplift. Like I'm designing and learning AI now on my own.
Hmm.
Like now I'm building out a website or a site with, my engineers, but I'm still designing features on my
Yep.
own stuff. And it's creative kid in me, the experimenting, the sort of quest to create that drives, and that comes from my childhood. I've always have that, and it's never left me. I'm very protective of that. I don't
Mhm,
go to places and deal with places that restrict that. I
mhm.
just don't do good in those places. So I always try to be around people and be at companies where I think they will allow me to be able to, express that part of my personality.
Yeah, we talked about that, how to stay relevant, you kind of have to self teach at this point. Like how I
Yep.
shared with you, I'm stepping into the realm of learning to build apps for this college level design course just to introduce it to the students because it's
Yep.
like everything is going a certain way. You'll get left behind.
Right.
That was our conversation we spoke about. It's like you will get left behind if you don't. It's not keeping up with the trends, it's keeping up with what is growing within this big arching thing of design.
Yeah, and not only that, but, I think we all by now understand that AI is gonna be a big part of the way that our
Mhm.
business is ran, whether we like it or not. Because, there's gonna be violators. There are violators now. And there are questions about AI and its authenticity and its use of, information and how does impact how we think and how we solve problems, but then how does AI relevant in a
Yeah.
world where creativity is so much based on the experiences that you have had throughout your lifetime. That's not a that's not something that you can look on the internet and find. And so AI is disseminating through millions and billions and zillions or whatever of just
Mhm.
data and information, but it can't it can't pull in my experiences as a kid in Richmond, California, growing up in drawing hot rod cars, and also, playing basketball and getting into fights in the street and talking with my boys with certain slang, like
Yeah.
all those things that make me pull out my sort of creative expression that are
Yeah.
ingrained in me as an individual person as well as King do.
Yeah.
So that is really the silver lining behind all of this is that we have to understand that AI is a tool and we have to learn how to use that tool to
Mhm.
stay relevant. And if we don't, then we have to understand that, it's going to be tougher and tougher to get that
Mhm.
position because, the business is not slowing down. Companies are looking to make money and more profits, and
Yep.
they're going to do what they got to do. And you got to do what you got to do. You
Yep.
got to be prepared for that. And that is not something that is, subjected to just people of color. That's
Right.
every
Yeah.
and everybody's doing what they gotta do right now, and it's better for you to have your foot in that race and be doing everything you can to as well.
Yes. So a couple more points. The first one is legacy. How do you want to be remembered? Is it for the work you've made, the doors you've opened, or the people you've
Mm,
come in contact with and changed?
that's a tough question. I don't know, man. I
Mhm.
don't know if I have a clear answer for that. I think a legacy is for me, is not up for me.
Mm.
I don't I you know, I've done things in my life, but all the stuff that I've done in my life and all the awards and things that I've gotten hasn't been because I've been chasing those things. I've gotten them because, I'm just being me. I'm
Mhm.
doing the things that matter to me. And that's all that I care about. You know, I want people to remember me, sure, but only for empowering them to do something to help someone else. If they can learn something from my life that actually empowers them to help someone else, then I guess that's what my legacy can be.
Right.
But outside of that, I really don't think about that stuff too much.
Mhm.
I just do what's important, what I feel like is important to me, and then, I let the chips fall where they may.
Final question. If there's a young black and brown creative listening right now and they feel talented but overlooked, unsure whether they belong in this field, whether they need to continue, what do you want them to remember about their voice, their value, and their future?
So, what I want them to realize is that, Black people come from a rich, inventive, creative, cultural history.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people of color that have designed things in this world that we don't even know about. And you don't design for the sake of designing, you design for how you want to make your world better
Yeah.
and let the chips fall from there. I
Mhm.
think, as a designer of color, we tend to want to, um, you know, have ourselves be in sort of this position where, we feel like, we have to prove something as people of
Right.
color. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I think really for me, it really wasn't about that. And I
Mhm.
think for those that are listening, I would just tell them to, channel the things that are important to them. Find out what really drives your interest and
Mhm.
go for it.
Mhm.
Because it's like at the end of the day, you want to be able to do work that means
Mhm.
something to you. And as designers, I talk about this all the time. We have privileged to a certain
Yeah.
degree because we're designing for people,
Mhm.
and people are using our stuff or seeing our stuff or engaging with our
Mhm.
things. So that gives us power. That
Mhm.
means we have responsibility, and our responsibility is to communicate clearly, to get things right, and be a source of truth, and to be able to
Yep.
tell that truth not only through the work that we do, but through the way that we live. And so,
Mhm.
um, like I said, you know, uh, I would just tell um, any black kid out there that's listening that would listen to me is um, it is inherently important for us to be in this business.
Mhm.
And as much and as daunting as it is now to be like, man, I don't want to do, um,
Yep.
it's important that our voices are heard. And if we
Yes.
don't do it, somebody else gonna do it.
Yep.
And, I know it's easier said than done because cats gotta make money, and that's the reality of it. But you can make a lot of money in this business. Trust
Yeah.
me, I've
Yeah.
seen it. I know people that are making millions of dollars doing
Yeah.
design, and I'm gonna tell you, it's a very, very, very real thing. But just like anything in life, if you give up, you don't get nothing. You got to stay committed, and the more committed you are, more driven, the more focused you are, the better chances you have of succeeding.
Yeah. Yeah. Mo, my man, thank you so much for
Yeah,
sitting
man.
with us today and having this conversation. Where can the people find you and what do you have coming up next?
Yeah. So thanks for asking that. I mean, I
Mhm.
think, people can anybody who wants to connect with me at any given time. I'm on Uplift. Our platform is just upliftdesigners.com. I really want people to really think about joining because really what I'm building there is a network and a community for Black and brown creatives. It's so important that
Yeah.
especially at this point that we stay connected. Uplift is a platform that I designed through Inneract Project
Mhm.
to help young aspiring designers find professionals that are working in the business at some of the
Mhm.
bigger companies that are just willing to talk to you, willing to
Yeah.
look at your portfolio, willing to help you in any way that they can. And like we
Mhm.
said, connections is a big thing. If you know people, you have a better chance of making it. And so, upliftdesigners.com is the URL. I would go there. You can go to the wait list, sign up, and from there we'll an email, we'll invite you in, and then you have the free reign. And the other thing, last thing that I'll say about it is that, the mentor mentee portion of the site is only just a tip of the iceberg of what we're trying to
Mhm.
do. Really is the job marketplace that's coming,
Mhm.
which, my goal is try to shower.
Yeah.
I really do mean that, like shower that platform with job opportunities. That's what I'm trying to do. To all my connections and people that are working or that
Yeah.
have committed to the platform, sharing opportunities as much as we can. And we're still in beta,
Mhm.
but we have an active base that's using it
Mhm.
and we're trying to build it. At some point, I'll probably even start doing events on there, seminars where people that are in the industry, recruiters, designers, and AI are
Hmm.
able to just come in there and, subscribe,
Hmm.
So I think like we want to be able to build something that allows folks to come in and
Yeah.
connect. Right now, it's free. At some point, we're probably going to charge, but I look at it like this, we as an organization have to charge in order to continue doing the work that we do. And we've always been committed. We've never slacked from committing to this goal of trying to connect people of color to opportunities. And we, at some point will be charging to be able to get money to continue that because raising money is not easy. And so we got to start charging just so that we have the money to be able to support a program that's going to help everyone.
Yeah.
And that is a little bit of where we are in our world now. It's just like we don't support each other. It's just tough to have opportunities.
Yeah.
Um, I really feel good about what we're building at Uplift. The mentor and menteeship, you can go in there and connect with as many as people as you want. And then there's also the job marketplace that will connect you. And then the events eventually will come too. So
Man, that's dope.
I know it's a
That's
lot
dope.
to
Nah,
say,
you're
but
good.
upliftdesigners.com.
Okay.
Check that out.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening to our podcast. My name is Justin Robinson. I had the talented, the community builder, the guy every designer needs to just buy him a coffee and chat with, the great man himself, Maurice Woods, also known as Mo. And this is the Art School Graduate Podcast. We'll catch y'all later. Peace.
All right, man. All right. Holla, holla.